I remember the first time I saw her. It was the third day of training at the Calvex Combat Academy, and I was still learning the names of my classmates. She sat in the back row of the classroom, near the window, with her hands folded on the desk, and her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. She did not raise her hand. She did not speak. She did not even seem to notice the rest of us. That should have made her forgettable. On a base full of apex predators from a dozen worlds, a quiet human girl should have been the last thing anyone paid attention to. My species, the Threxil, are built for dominance. We have claws that can tear through battle armor, and senses that can track a heartbeat across a crowded room. Most of my classmates were the same. Vorn warriors with double rows of teeth, Salian hunters who could smell fear from 50 paces, Drask cadets whose roars alone could stop a lesser creature in its tracks. And yet, every single one of us watched her. I noticed it first in Instructor Koss, our combat trainer. He was a massive Vorn, scarred from 100 campaigns, a being who feared nothing. But every time his eyes drifted toward the back row, toward that quiet human girl, his shoulders would tense, just slightly, like a soldier hearing a distant alarm he could not quite place. I told myself it was nothing. She was small. She carried no weapon. She had no visible strength, no claws, no armor plating like the rest of us. By every measure my instincts used to judge danger, she should have registered as the least threatening being in the room. But my instincts disagreed. Every time she was near, something ancient and wordless inside me went quiet and alert at the same time, the way a herd animal goes still when a shadow passes overhead, even before it understands why. I decided I was imagining things. My packmate Drav felt differently. He was a Salian, lean and fast, with a reputation for being fearless to the point of foolishness. On the 5th day, during a break between lessons, he leaned toward me and nodded toward the back row. "You feel it too," he said. It wasn't a question. "Feel what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Her," he said the word like it cost him something. "Every time she's in the room, I want to leave it, and I don't know why." I laughed it off, the way you laugh at something that scares you more than you want to admit. "She's a human. She's half our size. She hasn't said a single word since she got here." "I know," Drav said. "That's what worries me. We decided, the way young men of any species decide such things, that the only cure for an unexplained fear is to prove it wrong. So during the next open training period, when cadets were allowed to practice sparring drills in pairs, Drav walked past her desk and nudged her chair with his foot, hard enough to scrape it sideways across the floor. She did not flinch. She did not look up. She simply reached down, without any hurry at all, and pulled the chair back into place. Then she returned to whatever she had been reading. Drav came back to me looking strangely pale for someone with green-black scales. "She didn't even blink," he said. "Maybe she didn't notice." "She noticed," he said. "I could tell. She just didn't care." That, more than anything, unsettled me. On every world I had trained on, a challenge, even a small one, was answered. With a growl, a glare, a raised hand, something. Silence was not peace. Silence was the sound of something deciding you were not worth its attention. I began watching her more closely after that, though I told myself it was only curiosity. She ate alone, but she was never harassed, not exactly. It was more that other cadets, even the loud and reckless ones, seemed to naturally give her space, the way animals give space to a predator they cannot identify. She was polite when spoken to directly, and her answers were always short, precise, and unfailingly correct. She never boasted. She never competed for rank or attention, the way the rest of us did, constantly, instinctively, as if the air itself demanded it. 2 weeks into training, everything changed. We were in a sparring hall, running defensive drills under Instructor Koss's supervision. It was meant to be a controlled exercise. One cadet would simulate an attack, and the other would practice evasive maneuvers. Simple, safe. The cadet paired against a smaller Drask student, a young female named Issa, was a massive Vorn named Threk. Threk was strong even for our year, and everyone knew he had a temper he struggled to control. Instructor Koss had warned him twice already that week about excessive force during drills. I don't know exactly what triggered it. Maybe Issa's evasive footwork was too quick, and it embarrassed him in front of the class. Maybe it was simply a bad day. But partway through the drill, something in Threk's control slipped. His movements went from practiced to real. Issa stumbled, and for one terrible second, I saw Threk's claws rise with an intention that had nothing to do with training. The room froze. Instructor Koss was too far across the hall to reach them in time. Other cadets, myself included, stood locked in place, caught between the instinct to help and the instinct that told us getting between an out-of-control Vorn and his target was a very good way to become a target ourselves. Then I saw her move. She had been sitting at the edge of the sparring mats, observing, as she always did during drills she wasn't assigned to. She rose from her seat without any visible urgency, crossed the distance to Threk in a handful of unhurried steps, and did something I still find difficult to describe with the right words. It wasn't a strike, not really. It was more like she redirected him. A small motion at his wrist, a shift of her weight against his balance, and Threk, 3 times her size, found himself off balance and momentarily unable to complete the motion he had started. Issa scrambled back, unharmed. Threk dropped to one knee, more from confusion than any injury, blinking as though he had just woken from a dream he did not remember having. The whole thing took perhaps 2 seconds. The human girl helped Issa to her feet with a brief, steady hand, checked that she was unharmed, and then walked back to her seat at the edge of the mats, as though she had merely stepped away to get a drink of water. She did not look proud. She did not look shaken. She simply sat down and returned her attention to whatever she had been doing before. The hall was completely silent. Even Instructor Koss, who I had never once seen surprised in 2 weeks of training, stood with his mouth slightly open. "What?" Drav whispered beside me. "Was that?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know, but something in me finally understood what my instincts had been trying to tell me since the first day I saw her sitting quietly in the back row. It wasn't that she was weak. It wasn't that she was hiding some hidden fury waiting to explode. It was the opposite. She had complete control over her body, her strength, her reactions, down to the smallest, most precise degree. She had stopped Threk without hurting him at all, without even seeming to try very hard, in front of an entire room of apex predators who had spent their whole lives being taught that strength meant force, and force meant danger. She was dangerous not because she might lose control, she was dangerous because she never would. That night, in the mess hall, the story of what happened in the sparring room spread through every table. Cadets who had ignored her for 2 weeks now spoke about her in hushed, careful tones. Threk himself did not appear at dinner, and I heard later he had gone to apologize to Issa privately, something none of us had ever known him to do for anyone. I found myself, for reasons I still cannot fully explain, walking toward the back corner of the mess hall where she sat, once again, alone. "May I sit here?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected, though my instincts were screaming at me in 6 different directions at once. She looked up at me, studying my face for a moment, the way someone studies a weather pattern, deciding whether it might turn into a storm. Then she nodded once and gestured to the seat across from her. For a while, neither of us spoke. I picked at my food, unsure what to say to someone who had, only hours earlier, disarmed a fully grown Vorn twice her size, without so much as raising her voice. "You're not going to ask," she said finally. "Ask what?" Why I did it that way. Why I didn't just let him fall, or hurt him a little, to teach him a lesson. I hesitated. "Would you tell me if I asked?" She considered this. Hurting him wouldn't have taught him anything he needed to know. Stopping him without hurting him, that taught him something about what's possible. That's worth more. I turned that over in my mind for a long moment. It was such a simple statement, but it did not fit anything I had been taught about strength. On my world, control was proven by dominance. Here was someone proving something else entirely, that the deepest control was the kind that never needed to prove itself at all. "Where I come from," I said slowly, "the strongest person in the room is the one everyone fears." "Where I come from," she said, "the strongest person in the room is usually the one nobody notices until they need to be." I didn't have an answer to that. Over the following weeks, I found myself sitting near her more often, not out of the wariness that had first drawn my attention to her, but out of something closer to respect. She never spoke much. and never about herself. But she was patient in a way I had never encountered among any of my own kind. Once, when I struggled with a defensive stance during practice, she quietly adjusted my footing with 2 small corrections, said nothing else, and returned to her seat. My balance improved instantly. I never fell during that drill again. Dravov too eventually worked up the courage to speak with her, though it took him considerably longer than it took me. When he finally did, he came back looking almost embarrassed. "She said something to me," he told me later, sitting outside the barracks under twin moons, neither of our species had a name for. "What did she say?" I asked her if she was ever afraid, coming here, surrounded by people who could kill her without even trying. And she said no. She said the only thing worth being afraid of is losing control of yourself. Everything else she can handle. I thought about that for a long time afterward. Every predator I had ever known measured strength by what they could destroy. She measured it by what she chose not to. By the end of that training cycle, something had shifted in the way the entire class understood her. She still sat in the back row. She still spoke only when necessary. She still ate alone most mornings, though less and less as the weeks went on. But no one shoved her chair anymore. No one tested her with careless provocations. Instead, when trouble arose during drills, and it did, from time to time, among cadets whose instincts sometimes outran their discipline, more than one person found themselves glancing toward the back row first, checking whether she was watching, whether she might need to step in. She rarely did. Mostly, her presence alone was enough. Cadets who might have let their tempers slip found themselves holding back, some small part of their mind remembering the sight of Threk kneeling, confused and unharmed, after underestimating a quiet girl who had never once raised her voice. I think, in the end, that was the lesson none of us expected to learn at a combat academy built to train apex predators for war. We had been taught, all our lives, that power was something you displayed, something you used to make others afraid. She taught us, without ever meaning to teach anything at all, that the deepest power was the kind you held perfectly still, every day, choosing again and again not to use it unless it was truly needed. I still remember the first day I saw her, sitting silently in the back row, and the way every apex predator in that room watched her without understanding why. We understand now. It was never about what she could do to us. It was about what she chose not to do, every single day, in complete and quiet control.